Gone with the Wind. Clark Gable, Vivian Leigh. Great masterpiece of a film. I was always a big Clark Gable fan. I live in Culver City. Clark Gable, he took care of a lot of business in this area. Stayed in Culver City Hotel. Had a bad car accident in Culver City too, where someone was killed. A lot of people don't know about that. Clark Gable was not really a complicated guy, but between that and some other stuff they held over his head to keep his salary at about $3,000 a week, when Cagney and Bogey and others were able to make $1,000 a week. Should I say $5,000 a week? And Vivian Leigh, she's actually, I believe, buried in Culver City. I'm not sure where Clark Gable is buried. I think it is in the valley. Forest Lawn in the valley. Glendale. That's where he's buried. Anyway, this is a continuation of a video that I made called It's a Wonderful Life Not to Be a Slave. This one we're going to call How Not to Be a Slave. And continuing with that theme that Clark Gable was a slave in a way to the movie studios. Now here he is right now with Vivian Leigh in the greatest epic movie role of his career. Any actor on the planet Earth would have been proud to have the role as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. Still, to this day, the biggest box office success in the history of Hollywood. The movie makes more in one day than it did in the year that it came out. You know, the studio head bought the rights for this epic film from a lady. Can't think of her name at this particular second. But they bought it for $50,000, the movie rights. And after the success of the movie, when the movie came out, Louis B. Mayer, on his own, gave her an additional $50,000 because of the money that was made on this one film. But the interesting part about Gone with the Wind is that this particular movie was fiction. It's considered the greatest slave movie ever made about slavery. And the life and interactions of the people who owned slaves and lived with slaves and lived during the time of slavery. And it was a interesting depiction of the relationship between the rich, the poor, the class, and those who were considered not to have any class, or the classless. The powerful and the mighty, the weak and forgotten. So, Gone with the Wind was an epic film on all sorts of levels. But again, Gone with the Wind was a fictional film on slavery. You know, the first video I did called It's a Wonderful Life Not to Be a Slave, and it basically was called that because in large part It's a Wonderful Life was a movie about George and this man named George Bailey, whose life was less than stellar, who had a life like most people, was interested in living a fulfilled life and going places and doing things. That was all denied because the cares of life came in, and he was a slave to the town, a slave to his father's legacy, a slave to the business that was ran, and a lot of people depended on him. So in some ways, he was kind of a slave socially, and it prevented him from going out and conquering the world. And as a result, he found himself in a predicament, and he, like a lot of men of color, got into a desperate situation. But rather than living it out, like a lot of people who had privilege and find themselves in an unfortunate set of circumstances, he wanted to jump off a bridge into the cold, murky water. But God dispatched an angel who helped him to see who he really was and the value that he really gave to that town and to people's lives. And he was able to overcome his bondage. And in his darkest hour, he found out that he was a man that had a purpose and had a great life. So it's important to know your purpose. It's important to know what life has to offer for you. And in George Bailey's case, in the first speech or talk I gave about It's a Wonderful Life Not to Be a Slave, you know, it's important that in the modern time that we live in, not to be a slave as well. So I thought I'd give you a little history about Gone with the Wind. So this is your boy StoneThug, rapper, entertainer, music artist, poet, green home developer, prison, reform advocate. I wanted to talk a little bit about how not to become a slave. And basically there's a series of things you can do to prevent yourself in modern days in becoming a slave, so that you won't become a slave, because being a slave is not a good thing. George Bailey found out in the fictional drama It's a Wonderful Life, a social slave. Clark Gable, Vivian Leigh in this fictional drama that was one of the greatest epic movies ever made, Gone with the Wind. It's interesting that the movie, just to finish up on Gone with the Wind, it's fictional and it's considered the greatest movie of its kind. But Uncle Tom's Cabin, Django, and other films, 7 Years a Slave or 12 Years a Slave, whatever the title was, those were actual real stories. So it's interesting. Those were actual slave stories that were actual events that happened in history that involved people who were actual slaves. But Gone with the Wind, the greatest of all these films, is fictional. I just thought that was a little interesting take. I think it was shot in, it was released around the year 1937 or 38 or 39, something like that. Still a masterpiece. Highly recommended that you if you get a chance to take a look. I worked on that movie set and worked with a lot of people who worked on the film, and used to sell collectibles from this particular film. I think we still got a few things around. So anyway, this is not about Gone with the Wind. This is about you and your life and your kids and your family and your friends. How not to become a slave. And the way you prevent yourself from becoming a slave is, and prevent your children from becoming a slave, is you want to start early. You can feed your children, literally feed them food that can prevent them from becoming a slave. By feeding them healthy foods, staying away from salt, staying away from sugar, staying away from white bread, staying away from processed foods, staying away from eating at quick, satisfying, quick places to eat, like, fast food restaurants, and eating more meals from home. using less processed foods. This is one way of not becoming a slave through food. Because if you were to become unhealthy and develop diabetes and have to take shots of insulin or pills, then that would be becoming a slave physically. You can help yourself and help your children not become a slave by falling in love or caring for people who care for you, who love you as much as you love them, who give to you as much as you give to them. That's another way, emotionally, is a way of not becoming a slave. Falling in love or getting into a relationship that's unproductive and one-sided, you can and will become a slave. Somebody know what I'm talking about. Money-wise, there's a lot of people that know what I'm saying right now better than I can explain it. But there's a lot of people who don't have a clue about what I'm about to say about money. These quick places that you go for quick loans, or even places you go for legitimate loans. I know at the time it feels and seems like the right thing to do, but all too often it's a form of slavery. You get in debt, you will feel like you're under bondage. No, you wouldn't be a slave like the slaves of old. Those slaves had a lot more to deal with. But they also had to deal with financial bondage that was a crippling effect on them after slavery. A lot of landlords and land owners used to trick a lot of the slaves after slavery into working for years under the pretense of paying off debts. We're kind of back to that today, and it involves more than just a few black folks. There's a whole lot of other races and a whole lot of good white folks who are under bondage financially because of that reason. Taking out loans. You have to learn how to count your money, keep your money, try not to spend so much of your money, and try to use less money to buy things. Try not to buy so many things that you don't need. Try to buy things that you want. Try to buy things that are less, costly. Try to use things longer. Try to use your head and imagination more wisely when it comes to money. So if you do things like that, you can keep yourself from becoming a slave financially. Fall in love with somebody who falls in love with you, you can keep yourself from becoming a slave emotionally. Eating good food and eating better is a way of protecting yourself from becoming a slave physically. And all of these will help you to be successful, not to become a slave psychologically. Because slavery is a terrible thing. And nobody wants to be a slave no more. Thank you for listening. This is your boy StoneThug. I hope you enjoyed how not to become a slave. This is StoneThug. Listen to this again, pass it along, and give it thumbs up. I thank you so much for your time. God bless, and keep the faith.